what does a fundsler actually do on a day-to-day?
That's a good question. I should probably preface this answer by saying there's no typical day for me.
Well, I mean, today being a good example, because we don't usually start with a podcast.
I was about to say, besides lunches and podcasts, what do you actually do?
Yeah, well, James can speak for himself. I do this every morning. Access funds are funds targeted at high net worth investors or wealth managers who represent a number of high net worth investors. And the idea behind that is that the access fund manager aggregates the capital that they receive from all these high net worth investors. And then they invest as an LP or an investor in an underlying private equity fund or private credit fund or major real estate fund or whatever. The reason why that's such a significant innovation in the fund space is because high net worth investors, so I'm talking non-institutional investors, were previously precluded from making investments in those types of funds.
People don't realize that they're in everything. Funds are palm oil, but much less malevolent. Everything you look at, there's a fund involved somewhere along the line, and people think they're not relevant to them, but they're everywhere.
Today on the podcast, we've got James Kanabar and Virosh Poologasundram. Guys, really welcome to the podcast today. I'm excited to have you and looking forward to jumping right in.
Cheers,
Thanks for having us.
So this question is for both of you guys. You've both built your careers at Allens. What has made the right platform for you long term?
People throw around the term top tier all the time. Every firm in Australia is top tier, but in my mind, there's sort of a relatively select number of top tier firms, and that's great. That means it gives me the best platform to advise my clients, but it also means the people I'm working with are top of their game as well. But I think for me, it's a combination of that and also the genuine collegiate atmosphere that we have at Allens. And I think a lot of that is it's a top-down thing. So the way that our partnership is structured, the way that we're assessed, we're rewarded, encourages that collegiality. And so for me, it means not only you working with nice people, which is a huge part of it. We all come to work, we work long hours. You want to be working with people that feel like friends and colleagues and partners rather than competitors. But it also means that when I'm advising clients, I'm not thinking about, well, I'm incentivized to try and do all this work myself and, be a bush competition lawyer. I'm incentivized to make sure that the right people at the firm are involved and producing the right outcome for the client. So I think it's a combination of those two things, really.
Yeah, I mean, I agree 100% with everything James has said there. For me personally, though, it's probably the breadth of the work. We work across a number of different asset classes, private equity, real estate, energy transition. But then in my day-to-day job as well, I might go in the morning and be doing, drafting fund documents and negotiating with prospective investors on behalf of a fund sponsor. And then a few hours later, I'm doing fund investor work, acting for a super fund who's looking to invest in an offshore private equity fund, and then doing an advice piece, maybe later in the day. And I think it's that breadth of work that, sure, technically it's probably made me a better funds lawyer. Probably James is better placed to answer that than I am.
I agree.
But I think having that breadth, Kevin, means that because you've sat on both sides of the aisle, you understand the priorities and needs of the other side. And so you can get to a resolution much faster than if you didn't understand. So I think that's a huge reason why Allens has been a great platform. And I mean, the second is the people. I mean, James has already mentioned it very much at a partner level, but that kind of approach from the partners permeates throughout the rest of the firm. I think about the other senior associates I work with in other practice groups. I think about the juniors I work with in our group and the practice executives and the BD staff. And they're all fantastic and not only competent at their job, but they're genuinely empathetic about the needs of others and clients. And it means that we can work collaboratively and, deliver a really good quality service and experience for the client.
Yeah. Awesome response. Really good plug.
The other thing I'd add as well is there's a lot of talk, and there has been since I moved to Australia 12 years ago, about what is the, we're a long way away from everywhere else here, and clearly it's, whatever you're doing, but particularly with funds, it's an international market, and so a lot of the firms have sort of gone through that process of thinking about, well, how do we sort of hook up with international firms? Do we go for a merger? Do we stay independent? Or do you do what Allens has done, which is go into an alliance with a firm like Linklaters? And I think actually from my perspective, the alliance is great because we're able to tap into that network that Linklaters has all over the world, which particularly in what we do with funds, it's such an international market. Being able to tap into that international expertise is huge. But because it's an alliance, because we're not the same firm, we're also able to work with other firms. So Virosh and I have both got great relationships with lots of the other US and international firms, and we're not sort of precluded from working with them because of the alliance. So I think that's a big part of it as well. And I personally think sort of Alan's went down the right path.
And on that, a lot of people ask this question actually, what does the alliance mean? Really, do you actually have strong relationships with Linklaters and things like that? But we have so many people, going on secondment from Alan's to Linklaters, people from Linklaters coming to Alan's, and it's actually seamless, the transition between the two firms. And I think we're very fortunate that the culture also between those two firms is very similar. And so I think that has also helped facilitate a really strong relationship between the two firms.
Yeah, awesome. And then over to you then, James, naturally on to the next question. You trained at Linklaters in London.
Yep.
How did that experience shape your career and approach to funds work?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, I'll be honest. It's a different model in the UK. Like here, we get grads or paralegals applying for graduate positions, and they're so accomplished. They've got such a long CV. They've paralegaled at firms. They've worked in law firms. I had never worked in an office when I started at Linklaters. I'd had 2 weeks as the equivalent of a clerk. But to be honest, we were taken out and shown a good time, and it was really a marketing exercise by the firm. So I had no experience, and so it was a real culture shock for me coming into not only into an office environment, but somewhere like Linklaters where you're working on the most complex deals for the most blue chip clients. And so Linklaters was the training was second to none. And it turned me from someone who didn't really know how to work in an office to someone that has obviously gone on to be relatively successful. If I think back at sort of how would I characterize all of that or define it in a sort of succinct way, everything that Linklaters does is geared towards doing the best for the client. And that's in absolutely it. And that goes to, what you're taught about being responsive to the client and making sure that you're available. It goes to thinking about not only obviously getting the law right, but that's a given if you're at a firm like Alan's or Linklaters, but really thinking about, well, why is the client asking this question? What do they need this advice for? Even as granular as who is this advice going to be given to once it goes to the client? And once you start thinking about those sorts of things, you're not just producing a piece of black letter law advice or producing a document. You're really producing something that talks to what the client needs and wants and how they're going to use that. And I think those are sort of lessons I think I've taken into the rest of my career, and hopefully lessons that I'm now able to impart upon the lawyers in our team. But it was really that, putting the client at the absolute center of everything that the firm does.
Question for you, Virosh. You went on to comment to Linklaters in London. What led to that move, and what did you take away from the experience?
That's a good question. To be honest, Kevin, I just wanted to see Europe.
Can I just say that was not the discussion that we had at the time. So this is really revealing for me.
Now my true colors are coming out. Look, and in all honesty, Linklaters provided me the means to do that, and that was the initial reason, absolutely. But then when I look back now, sitting here reminiscing on my time at Links, kind of look back with rose-tinted glasses because the people I worked with were just terrific. But also, it probably gave me it did give me my first real exposure to the private equity sector. So before then, I was very junior when I went across, and working at Allen's, we were doing private equity funds work at that time. But I personally, I was doing more in the real asset space, so more real estate funds, that type of stuff. So I went to Linklaters, and I remember my first day, 7 p.m., I get dragged into a meeting by the partner, who's a lovely, lovely man. But he drags me in, and he's assembling a team to work on this massive fundraise for one of Linklaters' blue chip clients. It was a private equity fund. And I worked on that fundraise for about 8 months. It was a massive fundraise. And then after that, I was still dabbling in the private equity, not dabbling, I was still working in the private equity sector, but then this time from the investor side, predominantly acting for Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds on their investment in a range of private equity funds. And so from that perspective, it was a great experience because it gave me exposure to the PE sector, but also from the sponsor and investor side, which put me in good stead when I returned. And I think the other thing, which is not necessarily bespoke to Linklaters, it's very much a London market attribute is you're given more autonomy at a junior level. And initially that was quite daunting, being thrown, straight into the deep end. But it put me in really good stead when I returned to Allen's, because I returned as a senior associate. And of course, when you're a senior associate, there's an expectation that you operate with a level of independence. And so that experience at Lynx, driving things forward, interacting directly with clients, was hugely beneficial to when I returned to Allen's. Yeah.
Awesome. And you're looking at funds then as a sector and as practice area. It isn't always the most obvious path early on. What drew each of you to it, and what has kept you in the space?
I always describe myself as not only an accidental funds lawyer, but an accidental lawyer. So I was in my last year at university, and I wasn't ready to start working. I enjoyed being a student, and I'd spoken to my parents, and they said, "Oh yeah, well, we're happy to help you do a master's, but there needs to be a reason that you're doing it. It can't just be that you want to be a student for another year," which unfortunately for me is exactly the reason that I wanted to do the master's. So back to the drawing board, and one of my friends was he said, "Oh, I'm going to Allen and Overy, and it's great. You're a student for 2 more years. They'll pay your fees. They'll give you a maintenance grant." So I thought that sounds great. And I knew so little about it that I went and typed in AL, AN and Overy. So I hadn't studied law as a first degree. So I became a lawyer. I started a training contract because I thought, well, I'm not sure what I want to do, but it feels like being a qualified lawyer is always going to make me an attractive employee. So why not do that and see how that goes? And so I did that, and I did my first rotation in the M&A team, and I did banking and finance, and I had the option of qualifying back into one of those groups, and I'd worked unbelievably hard for that year. And so one of my friends had done a rotation in what was called the investment management group at the time, and he'd had a pretty cruisy 6 months. And I thought, look, I want to go into comment in my last 6 months rotation. I've worked really hard. I don't mind the idea of like having a little bit of a back seat for 6 months and maybe not burning the midnight oil. Unfortunately, in my naivety, I didn't realize the market had moved on a little bit in that 1 year period. So my first day in the funds team at Linklaters, I think I left at 2 a.m. It was it's a pretty brutal introduction. So I did it by accident. I think what kept me there, I mean, people often talk about the law and the practice area, and that's important, absolutely. For me, it's always been about the people. And particularly at that junior level, because I hadn't worked in an office environment, I didn't have that sort of wealth of experience to fall back on. A lot of it was about feeling like I was a part of the team and sort of feeling comfortable. And so I felt that immediately in that group, and that was part of it. But I think from a work perspective, I always wanted to be a transactional lawyer. I love the buzz of working on a transaction. I love that, you're getting down to the wire, and you can't sort of see external counsel and client. You're all working together. But even sometimes with the other side, because you're all getting down to the short strokes and you want to just get the transaction over the line. So I love that buzz. But what I liked about funds, and what I still like, is that there is that sort of the corollary advisory piece. So I suppose colloquially you'd say it's sort of cerebral transactional work. And for me, that was and remains a really good combo. And it's what's kept me interested, whatever we are now, 17 years later.
I think everyone that ends up as a funds lawyer surely got there by mistake. There's no way that's a deliberate choice, but it's a fortuitous mistake.
Yeah.
And look, my story is not too dissimilar to James's, in the sense that I remember at university, I pushed back doing corporations law and financial services law to the end of my degree, because I just thought, I'm not going to enjoy these subjects. And so let's just kind of kick the can down the road. And I was really fortunate. I had a very engaging professor who taught corporations law, and then she taught financial services law after that. And she made the content in those subjects so relatable to us. And so I thought, oh, it's not that bad.
So ringing endorsement.
Thanks. I mean, I was much younger back then, so I was, anyway, but and so I thought, I'll give a grad rotation in funds and financial services a go. And what I found compared to my other rotations was I was learning something new kind of every week, every fortnight. And I wasn't necessarily particularly good at that stage, but I was just expanding my knowledge on a continuous basis. And even at that early stage in my career, I identified that funds was going to be a growth area. And it still is, and just the broader private capital sector is going to be a massive growth area as it stands. And so in the end, I decided to settle in the investment funds team. And I guess what's keeping me in the space is probably a couple of things. The first is I'm genuinely interested in seeing how investors, particularly our institutional investors in Australia, how they invest the capital that's available to them. What are they investing in? Why are they investing in this particular asset or asset class? And then also, probably one of the most satisfying aspects of my job is guiding our clients through what can be a difficult kind of regulatory landscape at times, or market, particularly for our offshore clients that may not have invested in an Australian fund before or in Australia, and being able to work with them, find solutions, and help them through that process is incredibly satisfying.
And you touched on this briefly earlier on, but for the listeners, Virosh's question is for you. For someone completely outside the space, what does a fundsler actually do on a day-to-day?
That's a good question. I should probably preface this answer by saying there's no typical day for me.
Well, I mean, today being a good example, because we don't usually start with a podcast.
I was about to say, besides lunches and podcasts, what do you actually do?
Yeah, well, James can speak for himself. I do this every morning. But I think there's probably three buckets, and James kind of alluded to this as well. There's three buckets of work that I do. I can kind of only talk about myself, but also what other people in the team are doing. So there's the fund sponsor work, which is where you're acting for a fund manager. And that will involve, say, in the morning, I go in and I'm drafting fund documents for this fund, or negotiating documents with prospective investors, like side letters and subscription agreements and things like that. It depends on the fund depends on the fund and the nature of the investors. But then later in the day, which I noted before, I might be acting for super fund, sovereign wealth fund on their investment. And what that really entails is reviewing the fund documents in front of you, and then negotiating not so much the fund documents, but the side letter arrangements between the investor and the sponsor. And also advising your investor clients on the key issues and what's worth negotiating, and what's a reasonable position to negotiate given the broader context. And then there's the advisory piece. Probably the most recent thing I can think of is advising an offshore fund manager, who's looking to market their fund in Australia, advising them of the licensing considerations or the exemptions available to them. And so I guess the day-to-day is a lot of drafting, negotiating with the other side, speaking with your clients, and drafting advice. So it's a really broad range of work, which I think makes you just such a well-rounded lawyer.
And James, a question for you: how beneficial is cross-border experience in funds today, and is it becoming more or less essential?
Yeah, look, I think it's absolutely essential for a couple of reasons. So I think the first is if you look at the Australian manager class, and you look at most of the private funds that are set up, a significant minority up to a sort of significant majority of that investment will come from offshore investors. And so when you're acting for a fund manager and you're negotiating documents with those investors, you have to understand their perspective. You have to understand the sorts of terms that they're accustomed to seeing. You even have to have a sort of rudimentary understanding. They might have technical issues like ERISA or US tax issues, and you have to be able to issue spot and not only advise your client, but ultimately when you're acting for a fund manager, your client wants to get that commitment to their fund. And so you need, rather than just coming back and saying, well, no, this isn't in my client's interest, I'm going to cross it out. You need to sort of understand, well, how do I plot the middle path here? How do I make sure that my client's protected, but also that we finalize the investment? And similarly, if you look at our institutional investor class, we do a lot of work for not only superannuation fund investors, but also sovereign wealth funds, and they all invest internationally. And so again, when you're doing that work, whether it's because you're dealing with offshore structures, so limited partnerships, for example, which are much less common here outside of venture capital, you need to understand how they work. It's not as simple as saying, oh, well, it's sort of like a trust, but with some different names. Like they're legally different structures that come with different rights and obligations. And then I think just on the commercial side of things, the terms, like the market for fund terms is global. And if you're not tapped into that, you can't really, whether you're acting for an investor or a manager, you can't really properly advise them if your focus is only on what's happening in Australia. So I think I don't think you can be certainly the type of funds work that we do, an effective funds lawyer, unless you have that international perspective. And I think where we're fortunate in that sense, in that not only do we have the alliance, not only do we have relationships with offshore firms that we're able to tap into, but the vast majority of us, including both Virosh and I, have worked offshore. And so it's not a case of saying, oh, well, we know there's this issue, but we know who to go and speak to. Like, we're able to talk to our clients real time about some of those things and sort of issue spot and flag things and come up with solutions with them, because, with time differences, etc., it doesn't work sometimes to have to wait for London to come online or New York or whatever. So it's a long way of saying, I think, absolutely essential to being an effective funds lawyer.
And Virosh, where are you seeing the most genuine innovation in the space right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, it's the democratization of capital rather, in private funds, which has actually led to the growth of what we call access funds. So access funds are funds targeted at high net worth investors or wealth managers who represent a number of high net worth investors. And the idea behind that is that the access fund manager aggregates the capital that they receive from all these high net worth investors. And then they invest as an LP or an investor in an underlying private equity fund or private credit fund or major real estate fund or whatever it may be. And the reason why that's such a significant innovation in the fund space is because high net worth investors, so I'm talking non-institutional investors, were previously precluded from making investments in those types of funds for a number of reasons, but the main reason being that the minimum investment amount that you would have to commit was just far too high for most high net worth investors. And so they couldn't get exposure to those types of funds. And given the broader context, public market volatility, but also just the growing wealth amongst high net worth investors, they want more exposure to those types of investments or funds. And to be honest, the fund managers certainly want to attract and obtain capital from those high net worth investors. And we are seeing that in our everyday job, whether it's acting for major fund sponsors, access fund managers. We're hearing this anecdotally from our clients, but also we're seeing it in the market. We're seeing major fund sponsors like BlackRock, the Carlyle Group, Blackstone, looking to invest or have invested in access fund managers because they see that they see the next wave, which is high net worth investor capital, being very, very significant in their evolution as a fund manager. And so if the major players in the market are backing this, then it's a space that's going to grow.
And James, you touched earlier on Aussie super funds. Like, looking at superannuation funds, they now have enormous pools of capital to deploy. How has that changed the dynamic between Australian institutions and fund managers?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually, because there's obviously been over the past sort of 5 to 10 years significant consolidation within the superannuation industry, and so what that has resulted in is a far smaller number of subscale super funds and a small number of very, very large super funds, so like hundreds of billions of dollars of assets under management, which is a similar sort of evolution and trajectory that we saw in Canada with their pension funds. And so what a lot of people thought that would mean early on is that, well, these funds are now so large that rather than putting their money in managed funds, they're going to want to go out and originate and make investments directly. And so as a funds lawyer, I was sitting here thinking, am I just about to lose a large part of my practice? And my M&A colleagues are sitting there rubbing their hands together. But I think the reality has been much more nuanced than that. And I think all of the super funds themselves have said that they all still see a role for third party managers to play, because it's not just about the amount of money that you have to invest. It's also, do you have people who have the skill set to originate deals, to sort of manage and own investments? And so we're absolutely still seeing lots and lots of fund investment by super funds.
Looking at technology, how is technology and increasingly AI starting to impact the way you work day to day, James?
Look, it is. What I would say up front is that anyone that tells you that they know the impact that AI is going to have on any profession, let alone the legal profession, is a snake oil salesman. They're lying to you. Yeah. And I don't profess, and I don't think anyone at Allen's would profess to have all of the answers to that. And so I sort of go back to first principles, and I think, well, ultimately we're in a service business, and our job is to provide the best possible service to our clients in the most time and cost efficient way. That's ultimately what we need to do. And so I suppose if I then translate that into looking at AI, what I would say is there are absolutely tasks that are sort of repetitive tasks, pulling together a huge pool of data, which don't require that initial sort of data gathering, doesn't necessarily require specialist legal knowledge, doesn't need a human to do it, and also isn't necessarily work that A, our lawyers want to be doing, and B, our clients want to be paying for. And so if I look at funds, for example, it's, if we're there's a process called most favored nations, which you have with a lot of closed-ended funds. So once the fund has closed, investors get sent an election booklet with all the side letter provisions that have been offered to other investors, and they, subject to certain exceptions, they get the right to sort of say, actually, I'd quite like that side letter provision, or I'd like that one. And these booklets are sometimes 500-600 pages long. And so having AI do a first go at sort of saying, well, here are these 20 provisions that look identical, tell me what the differences are between them. So that's a good example of where you can do that. Now, you absolutely still need a lawyer to then go and stress test that, and to determine whether that's actually right, and to provide the advice. And so I suppose how I see AI at the moment is that it doesn't replace lawyers. It allows lawyers to spend more time doing work where the real value add is, i.e. the analysis, the advice, thinking about the commercial context, thinking about what you know about your client, and bringing all that together. But it frees up more of that time by doing some of the sort of grunt, heavy lifting work at the outset. The other thing I should say is that a lot of our clients have very different attitudes to the use of AI. So we've got a number of clients who do not want AI tools to be used on their matters. And we've got other clients that are very, very keen to see AI used wherever possible. And we've obviously got to take those considerations into account as well. And then the final thing I'd say is that people talk about AI as though it's this monolithic thing, but there's a number of aspects to it. So a lot of what I've been talking about is, sort of AI where it's, whether it's sort of preparing a draft document or doing something that you'd think of as a lawyer otherwise doing. But there are lots of other applications. So for example, before a meeting, I'll use Copilot and I'll say, here's a 3-week long email chain. Can you summarize what the key talking points are so I'm better prepared for the meeting? And I think across the firm, those sorts of tools, it's not disclosing sensitive client data. It's all internal. It's not replacing my job in the meeting, which is to run the meeting, to answer questions, to move things forward. But it's just making sure that I'm better prepared for that meeting. There's a whole spectrum of different applications. And I think the overall comment is, when you're in the service industry, you sort of have to not only move with sort of where the market is going, but also not be too reactive. We as a firm have got, a team of people who are sort of dedicated to looking at the applications for AI, looking at concerns that clients are raising or desires that clients have in terms of the use of AI, working with partners and other lawyers to sort of think about, well, how do we structure this? What's the best way of harnessing AI? And I think there's no one size fits all.
On that, I actually think it's an incredibly exciting time.
Yeah, I agree.
Particularly if you're a junior lawyer, because what I suppose I found uncomfortable was sometimes you'd be walking down the corridor and you've got, the university medalist from ANU or whatever, or Sydney Uni or whatever, and they're doing doc review or something, or they're doing a task which now we know can easily be performed by AI, which actually frees up our junior lawyers for more cerebrally challenging tasks. And that will then fast track their development as lawyers. It's not just at the junior level, I think it's at all levels. And so I actually think that's where a firm like Allen's can really add value, because we do add value on those difficult issues and transactions, and it then allows our lawyers to spend more time on those more challenging issues. And the second thing is, AI, of course, will play a role in the future. As James said, I don't know to what extent, but I think there's always going to be a role for lawyers, because we're in a position where we can empathize with our clients, understand what they're going through. And AI can't necessarily do that, or doesn't do that. It performs tasks, but that human level of interaction, that ability to build rapport with the clients, to build trust, you need humans to do that. And so I think there's very much going to be a role for lawyers going forward. It's just going to be different.
I think that's right. I mean, and the other thing I would say is that, AI has to be used with caution if you're using it to, as we've seen pretty high profile examples of, reports being produced using AI, riddled with mistakes, documents being presented to court that where there are errors in it, and it's been produced by AI. And because I'm sort of cool and fun, I spent some time at the weekend once doing, because this is how I get my kicks. I decided to use an AI tool to produce. I said, here's a fact pattern. Tell me if I need a financial services license. So that's if you want to know how I spend my time at the weekend, that's it. But
great insights.
and it was written beautifully. And that's the thing, because the way that a lot of these AI tools write, they're very convincing and authoritative. And so you can read it and sort of be lulled into a false sense of security. But when I critically analyzed what the output was, they'd made up financial services. So it was fundamentally wrong. And so I think the thing that we are very clear on as a firm is that AI is there to support us as lawyers. It's not there to produce legal advice. And as soon as you move into that world, then we may as well all pack up and go home, I think.
And Virosh, you touched earlier on junior lawyers. So for junior associates trying to break into funds, what really differentiates the strongest candidates?
Yeah, I think this is probably a general comment on junior lawyers, whether they want to come into the fund space or they want to go into a different space. The things that really differentiates, I suppose, the strongest juniors from just maybe good or okay juniors is, first is asking questions. That's so important, because when juniors are asking questions, it's demonstrating that they're thinking about the task or the transaction at hand. Having a good attitude, I think, goes a long way, being up essentially for anything. And I think finally, if a senior lawyer sends you an email chain or background material, taking the time to actually read that material, because then that will provide broader context to the actual task you're doing. And often what happens is, if you haven't worked with a junior before, you'll give them a task, you'll see how it goes. And if they do a really good job, then you'll bring them along on the journey for the transaction generally. And so that's why I think it's even more important, for a junior to read that background material so that they understand the broader context. But I should say that, the juniors that I work with are actually fantastic. They display those attributes in spades, and they are far better than I was when I was a junior. And so we're very fortunate at Allens that across the board, not just in the funds team, that we have some fantastic juniors who are not only competent at what they do, but are just very good working with people, which means you're not concerned putting them in front of a client or putting them in front of another practice group, because you just know they're going to deliver. They're just going to deliver.
It's kind of going back to what you guys were saying earlier on. It's like, to be the best, you really do have to surround yourself with the best. And I think to give yourself the best shot, as a junior associate, you have to, look at firms like Allens and be like, all right, if I go in here, I'm really taking charge of my career.
Yeah, that question is a good question, because it's about, okay, what do we want from our juniors? What differentiates the strongest from, say, good or okay juniors? But it's also imperative for senior lawyers to invest time in the juniors, because if you want to deliver a positive client experience, you can't do it alone as a partner or a senior associate. You need a good team around you, because the best clients, we like to think that if we're a good firm, we're going to have very good clients, and we do. We have some exceptional clients, and people who work there are very switched on, which means that if they're an investor client, they're going to be doing a lot of investments. If they're a manager, they're going to be raising a lot of funds. So you need a good team to cater for that. And so that's why it's so important to not only just expect these things from your juniors, but to take the time to sit down with them, explain what's important, so that they can develop and help you.
And James, when you're assessing progression to senior associate or partner, what are the real differentiators beyond technical skill?
So we as a firm, we do look at sort of long-term pipeline, and the reality is sometimes you work with associates and you look at them, and even at that level, and you're like, I can see this person being a partner, but often that's not the case, and people develop at different rates. And so whilst we do sort of look long term, I would sort of differentiate what we're looking at in terms of someone becoming a senior associate versus what you might be looking at for partnership. And as you said, if we put aside technical capability, for a senior associate, a lot of it is can that person manage a team? Can they manage sort of client relationships? Are they able to sort of go out and, and either present or run a meeting? So do they have that sort of that presence and that confidence? I think that's a big part of it. I mean, obviously technical skill is always a part of it, but it's sort of a given that someone will be technically very good. So I think as a senior associate, it's those sorts of things like, have they already shown that they've got an aptitude to be a good mentor to the junior lawyers, to, as Virosh just said, like investing in our junior lawyers is a huge part of the sort of constant regeneration of the business. So have they shown that they're able to do that? Can they be a good mentor? Can they run a team? I think with partnership, it's obviously all of that as well. But that probably partnership is different in that it's the first promotion where it's not necessarily just based on your skills and your attributes as an individual, because ultimately there needs to be a business case there. And so, whilst obviously there is a huge focus on skills of people when they're in the run up to partnership, a lot of it is, well, what is the business case? What is the type of work or the type of clients that this person does and will be working for? Is that the type of work and the type of clients that we as a firm want to be working for? And not only do we want to be working for them, but we've got finite investment. Making up a new partner is an investment, and so if you've got finite investment, is that the most effective way to put some of that investment? And so whilst to be a partner you've got to have all of those other skills, you've also got to have that business case. And again, any partner that tells you that there's not a huge element of luck in becoming a partner is probably lying to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like certainly in my case, I was fortunate to be in a place and a time where the type of skill set I had, the type of work I had done, and the type of clients I knew were all things that the firm wanted to invest in and where they saw growth. And so had none of those things been the case, I could have been exactly the same lawyer with exactly the same skill set and not been a partner.
The senior associate aspect there just sounded like my appraisal meeting. So
again, I was excited for that question.
I was like,
this
I'm
is
doing deja vu from a few months ago anyway. But no, I agree with everything James said. Absolutely.
I think like sometimes you have to look at your career as an associate because it is relatively short compared to what it can be as a partner.
Yeah.
And you really do need to get your reps in, not just from a technical perspective, but like surrounding yourself with learning from a senior associate, right? Soft skills. Replicating what they're doing, someone just being made up to partner. What have they actually done in the last 4 or 5 years that I can look at my career as a junior associate and say, you know what, I want to kind of replicate that and I want to be in the best position to do that and the right environment. Because and a lot of these people, sometimes associates, they don't understand that they really need to get those reps in early on and be surrounding themselves with people who, when they do, are knocking on the door for partnership, they have the skills to do it, because it's kind of too late then if they don't have it, Yeah.
And to one of the points that you made there, I think it's also important to not think too far ahead, I suppose. I mean, you have to think ahead. I mean, there has to be some kind of forward planning, but to appreciate and be self-aware that, okay, I actually need to spend a few years in this position as an associate, as a senior associate, as a managing associate, or whatever it may be, so that I can acquire the relevant skills, the relevant connections, whatever it may be, so I can go to the next stage. Because the worst thing is you move on to the next stage and you're actually not ready.
Yeah.
And that's a far worse position to be in. So for any junior that I work with, it's like, I just take a step back. You've got time because your career is a marathon.
Yeah.
So don't get too caught up in, this person got there when they were 35 or whatever, or 32 or whatever it may be. It's just everyone has their own journey. And if you put in the effort, you work strategically, you will get there in the end.
You completed a master's in law and finance at Oxford alongside just a common period at Links. How did the academic experience complement your practice?
Yeah, it was certainly an academically rigorous program, but probably the biggest benefit I got out of my time overseas studying is the global network that I was able to establish kind of instantaneously, because that type of network otherwise may take several years to develop. And those connections have been invaluable. In fact, they've even generated work for the firm. So I had a colleague, a good friend of mine from North America, just give me a call. He said, look, there's a deal we're doing and there's an Australian angle here. We need Australian M&A PE lawyers. And I was able to facilitate that introduction. And fortunately, we got the role. It's not only that, but also getting ourselves in front of prospective clients to pitch to those clients. Again, that network has been invaluable in giving me those opportunities. So, I think that's probably the biggest benefit. And I remember when I or I finished the degree and I came back to Allens and I thought, have I just kind of wasted a year of my life? I mean, it was a great life experience, but should I have just come back? And I had that thought process probably for a few years, to be honest. And I just thought, I just wasted a year. I should have come back earlier. But in the last year or two, as my colleagues have also been getting more senior in their respective roles at other organizations around the world, they've now been in a position to refer work to us or to get me in front of prospective clients. And so now I can look back and see, it's been a very invaluable experience. And my grandfather actually said, you're not going for the academic rigor per se, although it will be academically rigorous. You're going to meet other people who will broaden your horizons. And that's absolutely what happened.
Your network is your network, right?
100%.
And James, question for you. Besides working with Virosh, what do you enjoy most about your role? And what do you find most challenging?
That was going to be my answer. Yeah. So I'm not sure where to go with this one.
Challenging.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, other than working with Virosh, what do I find most enjoyable? I think, look, Virosh touched on this earlier. It's the variety. No day looks like the previous day or the next day. And so you're working for different types of clients in different locations, doing different types of work. So I think it's the variety and also, to be honest, the complexity. Like the reality is that the part of the market that we're in, we're not doing cookie cutter, wash, rinse, repeat work. Like to be frank, clients that want that work done don't necessarily see the value in paying our fees. We're at the point of the market where we're best is doing that really complex, bespoke work, the sort of bet the house type work. And so it means then that by definition, most of the stuff I'm doing is novel and or complex, and you're working also with counterparties that are also highly sophisticated. And so I think it's a combination of that variety and the complexity, which it's sort of like being on a treadmill and someone's dangling a piece of food in front of you and you can't quite reach it. It keeps you going because you're like, it's always so complex, and eventually I'm gonna crack this, and no question anyone ever asks me will surprise me. I've not quite got there yet, but I think that's part of it, right? It's the constant challenge, and that's what keeps me motivated.
Awesome. On to some quick fire questions. One thing about the market that excites you most, James?
Obviously nothing, right? Because it's so delighting. I think evolution.
Yeah.
Things are always constantly changing. And back to my previous answer, that makes it exciting. So I think evolution.
Access funds.
That was a much more quick fire. He got the brief. Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to go you next, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm lucky that I get to answer after James. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Best piece of career advice you've received?
Take a panoptic view of a deal.
It was as a junior lawyer, and it's your client is the senior lawyer that you're doing work for.
Great response. I think James wins that
one. Yeah. 1-1. Good.
I'm saying 1-1's fair.
Biggest misconception about funds?
People don't realize that they're in everything. Their funds are palm oil, but much less malevolent. They're everything you look at, there's a fund involved somewhere along the line, and people think they're not relevant to them, but they're everywhere.
That's a good response. I can't compete with that. I was going to say that there's a misconception that we're very siloed, but actually we work with so many different practice groups, tax, real estate, M&A, you name it.
And lastly, one thing you tell your newly qualified self?
Ask more questions.
Exactly the same. Yeah.
Boom. Thank you. That was great. I think that was a draw at the end. Yeah. That was awesome, guys. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, that's good.
Thank you.
I think where can people reach out, or if they want to get in touch with you guys, is it LinkedIn or email?
Yeah, both.
Sorry. I shouldn't answer that. James should answer that.
No, you're allowed to speak, Virosh. That's the type of organisation that we are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, look, anywhere, obviously on the website, email, LinkedIn, mobile number. Yeah, always very, like, we both love what we do and we love Allens, and we're always very happy to take time to talk to people that are interested. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Thanks for the time, guys.
I reckon we're both a bit like you, like probably the part of the job we like the most is actually just speaking with people and getting to know people, to be honest.
I could get it. Yeah. This was great. It was a start of that where I was like, this could go one way. And I was like, this is kind of going to go like a pub chat. And I was like, I had to bring it back and start asking technical questions. But there was so many different angles you guys could use it. I think, like, obviously the personalities and Allens, and then obviously the technical stuff, which is a bit over my head. And then, back into it then around, what do you enjoy about being a funds lawyer? I think there's so many little avenues there that you guys can use. I was even listening to that and I was like, this could be someone who's thinking about putting a graduate application in, and like really seeing you guys and the synergies you have. Yeah. It's clear that not only enjoy working with you as lawyers, but also as people outside of work. Thanks for taking the time.
No, thank you.
Great.